You're standing in the hallway at work, bag already on your shoulder, when someone catches you and says, "Hey, can you help with this real quick?" You already helped them last week. And the week before. You hear yourself say yes before you've even checked your calendar, and something in your chest tightens immediately. You don't like admitting that one small yes often turns into an unspoken obligation you never agreed to. Here's the interruption you can use today, exactly as written: "I can help this time, but I won't be able to take this on going forward." Say it calmly, once, and stop there. In the next 10 minutes, the air clears. The request either shrinks to its original size or stops entirely. You feel a subtle relief in your body because you didn't give away future access without consent, and you didn't have to walk it back later. Educational content inspired by classical Stoic texts. Not medical, psychological, financial, or legal advice. This won't rush you, but it will keep you from spiraling. The pain here isn't generosity. It's entitlement creep. You help once in good faith, and suddenly it's assumed. Requests stop sounding like requests. They start sounding like expectations. You feel boxed in, because if you say no later, it feels harsher than if you had been clear at the start. This is costing you time, energy, and quiet resentment, because your willingness gets mistaken for availability. What makes this so draining is that it rarely comes with a conversation. No one says, "I expect this from you now." It just happens. And the longer it goes on, the harder it feels to correct without guilt or awkwardness. You end up managing other people's expectations instead of your own limits. By the end of this lesson, you won't stop being helpful. What you'll learn is how to set expectations the first time you say yes, how to prevent repeat requests from forming by default, and how to stay generous without feeling used. The goal isn't rigid boundaries. It's early clarity, so your help stays a choice instead of a burden. If learning how to protect your generosity while staying respected matters to you, these lessons are built to give you tools you can actually use in real moments like this. Subscribe for more lessons like this. First, you'll learn how to give help in a way that doesn't create open-ended ownership. Next, you'll see how to correct the dynamic when someone treats your past help as a permanent role. Then, you'll practice holding your ground when pressure or guilt shows up. Finally, you'll watch how these pieces come together in a real situation where saying yes once almost turns into saying yes forever. There's a moment later where someone comes back and says, "Since you helped last time," and everything in you wants to either cave or snap. When that moment hits, you'll know exactly how to respond without damaging the relationship or yourself. You're at your desk when a coworker drops a file into your inbox with a casual note, "Can you take a quick look like you did last time?" Last time felt fine. You had space. You were being helpful. This time, your stomach tightens because you recognize the pattern forming. What started as help is quietly turning into expectation. Here's the microscript to use the first time you say yes, exactly as written: "I can help with this once, but I won't be able to own it long term." You say it calmly, without apology, and you keep your tone matter of fact. This works because it sets a boundary at the moment generosity is offered, not after resentment has built. Most ownership creep happens because expectations are left vague. When you help without defining the edges, people fill in the blanks in ways that benefit them. This sentence fills the blank for them, early, clearly, and without conflict. Picture this in a familiar North American workplace setting. A teammate asks for help preparing a report. You might say yes, do a great job, and move on, only to be asked again next week, then looped into future updates. With this script, you still help. You still contribute. But you quietly remove the assumption that this is now your role. The work stays a favor, not a handoff. Here's the tiny action you can take today. The next time you agree to help with something that could repeat, add one sentence that defines the scope. Just one. No long explanation. Either you clarified the edge or you didn't. Now slow this down for a brief practice. Take a breath and imagine saying the line without softening it. Notice any urge to add "sorry" or "I hope that's okay." Let that urge pass. Boundaries sound strongest when they're neutral. A common mistake here is thinking you'll set the boundary later. Later is when emotions are involved. Later is when people feel blindsided. Early boundaries feel informational. Late boundaries feel personal. This tool keeps things impersonal. Another version of this shows up outside of work. A friend asks you to help with a recurring task, rides, errands, emotional support. You say yes because you care. Weeks later, it's assumed you'll keep doing it. The correction is the same. Help once, name the limit immediately. Caring doesn't require indefinite availability. Why this works is simple. People aren't mind readers. They operate on precedent. When you define the terms early, you prevent precedent from forming in the wrong direction. You're not taking something away, you're preventing a misunderstanding. Here's a slow practice moment you can do right now. Think of the last time you helped and wished you'd been clearer. Imagine rewinding the moment and adding one calm sentence about scope. Notice how much lighter it feels to imagine clarity instead of cleanup. This matters later because once someone believes they own your help, changing the arrangement becomes emotionally charged. You have to explain, justify, or disappoint. Setting expectations early saves you from those conversations entirely. As we move forward, you'll see what to do when you didn't set the boundary early, when ownership has already formed and you need to reset it without burning bridges. That's where this skill gets tested, and where clarity has to be introduced after the fact instead of at the start. You're already late when the message comes in. Hey, can you handle this the same way you did last time? There's no question mark this time. Just an assumption. Your chest tightens because you recognize what's happening, and because you also recognize your own role in it. The mistake here isn't that you helped. It's that when ownership quietly formed, you tried to manage it by being nicer instead of being clearer. You absorbed the discomfort instead of correcting the frame. That strategy works exactly once. After that, it turns into resentment. The correction isn't confrontation. It's reframing. Here's the rule, exactly as written: I'm happy to help occasionally, but this isn't something I can be responsible for. You don't justify it. You don't apologize. You don't say it angrily. You say it as information. This works because entitlement feeds on ambiguity. When someone believes your help equals responsibility, they act accordingly. This sentence doesn't accuse them of wrongdoing. It simply redraws the line they crossed, without drama. Picture this in a familiar North American setting. A coworker keeps routing tasks through you because you once fixed a problem quickly. You start feeling pressure, but you keep delivering because you don't want to be difficult. Eventually, the workload feels unfair. With this correction, you respond to the next request by reframing your role. You don't undo the past. You define the present. Here's the tiny action you can take today. Identify one recurring request that feels assumed rather than asked. The next time it shows up, respond with a boundary sentence that clarifies responsibility, not availability. This is measurable. Either you name the limit or you keep absorbing it. Now pause for a brief slow practice. Take a breath and imagine saying the line without softening it. Notice the fear that comes up, fear of disappointing, fear of seeming unhelpful. Let that fear exist without obeying it. Boundaries don't need to feel comfortable to be effective. A common mistake here is overcorrecting. You finally speak up, but it comes out as frustration or a long explanation of everything you've been carrying. That turns the moment emotional and invites debate. Reframing works because it's calm and brief. It doesn't ask for agreement. It states reality. Another version of this shows up in personal relationships. You help someone once, then twice, then it becomes expected. When you finally hesitate, they seem surprised or offended. The urge is to backpedal or overgive to smooth things over. The correction is the same. You clarify the role, not the relationship. I care about you and I can't own this can coexist. Why this works is rooted in self-respect. When you consistently accept responsibility you never agreed to, you teach people how to treat your time. When you calmly redefine that responsibility, you teach them again. Most people adjust. The ones who don't reveal something important. Here's a quick pattern interrupt. If guilt spikes after you set the boundary, ask yourself, would a reasonable person hear this as clear or cruel? If it's clear, you've done your part. Cruelty requires intent to harm. Clarity does not. This matters later because ownership creep doesn't stop on its own. If you don't correct it, it solidifies. You become the default, the fallback, the safety net. And once that identity sets in, stepping out of it feels like betrayal, even though you never volunteered for the role. Notice the progression now. First, you learned how to set expectations early. Then you learned how to define limits once expectations already exist. You're not becoming less helpful. You're becoming more intentional about where your effort goes. As we move forward, the pressure increases. There will be moments when someone reacts emotionally to your boundary, confusion, disappointment, even subtle pushback. That's where staying grounded matters most, and where this skill stops being theoretical and starts being real. There's a belief that makes ownership creep especially hard to stop once it's formed. If they're upset, I did something wrong. It feels reasonable. You value harmony. You don't want to damage the relationship. But under pressure, this belief trains you to retreat the moment someone reacts emotionally to your boundary. Here's the myth to let go of. Discomfort is not proof of wrongdoing. Often, it's just the sound of expectations being corrected. When you stop owning something you were never meant to own, the other person may push back, not aggressively, but emotionally. Confusion. Disappointment. A subtle tone shift. The danger is that you interpret that reaction as a signal to soften, explain, or reverse your boundary. That's where ownership sneaks back in. The instruction when this happens is clear and contained. You don't argue. You don't defend. You hold. Here's the script, exactly as written. I understand this is inconvenient, and my answer is still the same. You say it once. Calmly. Then you stop talking. This works because emotional pushback often seeks movement, not explanation. When someone reacts, they're testing whether the boundary is real or negotiable. If you start justifying, you reopen the conversation. If you hold steady, the test ends. Picture this in a familiar North American context. A colleague looks surprised when you clarify that you can't keep handling a task. They sigh. They say, I just thought you were okay with it. You might rush in to reassure them, soften the message, or take partial responsibility again. With this correction, you acknowledge their feelings without absorbing it. You don't retreat. You don't escalate. You stay put. This matters because most boundaries don't fail at the moment they're stated. They fail at the moment they're challenged. Now slow this down for a brief practice. Imagine someone reacting with disappointment after you set a limit. Notice the urge to smooth things over. Feel how strong it is. Then imagine yourself saying the line and stopping. Notice the discomfort, and notice that nothing else actually happens. The world doesn't collapse. The relationship doesn't explode. There's just a pause. A common mistake here is over-empathy. You try to show how much you understand their position, and in doing so, you slide back into ownership. Empathy doesn't require self-sacrifice. You can understand someone's frustration without fixing it for them. Another version of this shows up in family dynamics. You help once, then it becomes expected. When you finally say no, the reaction is emotional, hurt, confusion, maybe even accusation. The impulse is to retreat because family reactions carry extra weight. The correction is the same. You acknowledge the feeling. You don't reverse the limit. Why this works is grounded in clarity. Boundaries that move under pressure aren't boundaries, they're preferences. When you hold steady through the first emotional wave, people recalibrate. They adjust their expectations to match reality instead of pushing you back into an old role. Here's a slow practice you can use today. The next time you feel the urge to over-explain a boundary, pause and ask yourself, am I clarifying or am I trying to be liked? If it's the second, stop talking. The stakes here are important. If emotional reactions reliably undo your limits, you'll only feel safe setting boundaries with people who never push back, which usually isn't who needs them most. Learning to tolerate discomfort without retreat is what turns a boundary into something durable. There's a vignette coming where this gets tested fully. You'll see what it looks like to hold a limit when someone leans on guilt, history, or urgency, and how the situation doesn't resolve perfectly, but does become clearer and calmer. That's where generosity stops turning into obligation and starts looking like choice again. You're packing up at the end of the day when your phone buzzes. It's the same person. Same tone. Hey, can you just handle this one more time? You're already familiar with it. The message lands heavier than it should, not because the task is big, but because it feels assumed. Your body reacts first. A small spike of irritation. A flash of guilt. A familiar thought, if I don't help, this becomes awkward. You can almost feel yourself slipping into the old role, the reliable one who smooths things over. The old reaction almost wins. You draft a reply that says yes with conditions, explanations, and a soft promise that somehow still sounds like ownership. Your thumb hovers. You stop. You remember the first tool, name the edge when you help. Except this time, you're not at the beginning. Ownership has already formed. So you don't pretend it hasn't. You don't overcorrect. You choose clarity. You take one breath and write, I can help occasionally, but I can't be responsible for this going forward. You read it once. It feels firm. Not cruel. You send it. A few minutes pass. No reply. The silence stretches, and with it, the urge to fix. You feel the pull to add a follow-up, something friendly, something explanatory, something that reassures them you're still a good person. This is where the old pattern usually pulls you back in. You hold. When the reply comes, it's polite but edgy. Oh. I didn't realize. I just thought since you've been doing it, the sentence trails off, unfinished, heavy with implication. You feel the pressure spike again. This is the emotional pushback you knew was coming. The moment where your boundary gets tested not with argument, but with disappointment. You use the next tool. You don't debate the past. You don't justify your limit. You acknowledge and hold. I understand that, you write, and my answer is still the same. Then you stop. The discomfort sits with you for a few minutes. You notice your shoulders are tight. Your mind tries to predict fallout. You let those thoughts pass without chasing them. You're not angry. You're not defensive. You're steady. Later, something subtle shifts. They respond with a shorter message. Okay. I'll figure something else out. No apology. No drama. Just acceptance. It's not perfect. It's not warm. But it's clear. The next week, a similar request comes in, but it's phrased differently. This time, there's a question mark. Would you be able to help with this? The scope is smaller. The assumption is gone. You notice it immediately. You say yes, because you actually want to. And because this time, it feels like a choice. There's still some tension. You don't suddenly trust the dynamic completely. You're aware. But the resentment that used to buzz under the surface is quieter. You're no longer bracing yourself for the next assumption. Later that day, you think about how small the moment was and how big the shift feels. You didn't lecture. You didn't withdraw. You didn't become less generous. You simply stopped letting your yes turn into ownership without consent. The situation isn't resolved forever. You know that. Boundaries aren't set once, they're maintained. But something important has changed. The role you were slipping into has loosened its grip. You feel calmer, clearer, more in control of your time. And when you help now, it feels lighter, because it's chosen, not claimed. That's the improvement. Not a perfect ending. Not a dramatic confrontation. Just a quieter dynamic where generosity no longer costs you self-respect, and where your limits don't need to be defended, only stated and held. Chapter break. Delete this line. What you've been practicing in this lesson is the difference between reacting to requests and responding with intention. Reacting looks like saying yes on reflex, smoothing discomfort, and carrying responsibility you never agreed to. Responding looks like naming limits early, correcting assumptions calmly, and holding steady when pressure shows up. One path quietly drains you. The other protects your generosity and your self-respect at the same time. First, you learned how to set expectations at the exact moment you help, so a single yes doesn't turn into permanent ownership. That early clarity prevents misunderstandings before they harden into roles. Then, you learned how to reframe responsibility after ownership has already crept in, without confrontation or guilt. Next, you practiced holding your boundary when emotional pushback appeared, recognizing that discomfort isn't wrongdoing, and that steadiness is often enough. Finally, you saw how these tools work together in a real situation where saying yes once almost turned into saying yes forever, and how clarity shifted the dynamic without blowing it up. The core lesson underneath all of this is simple: generosity without structure turns into obligation. Structure doesn't make you less kind, it makes your kindness sustainable. When you stop letting your help imply ownership, people learn how to relate to you more accurately. Some will adjust easily. Some will test the boundary. Both responses give you information you didn't have before. Now let's lock this into action with 3 things you can do today. First, choose one area where your help has become assumed and decide the scope you're actually willing to offer. Write one clear sentence that defines that scope, like "I can help occasionally, but I can't be responsible for this long term." Keep it ready. The next time the request shows up, use the sentence without embellishment. Second, practice holding instead of explaining. When someone reacts emotionally to your boundary, acknowledge the feeling once and don't move the line. Use the phrase, "I understand this is inconvenient, and my answer is still the same." Say it once. Then stop. Measure success by whether you stayed steady, not by how comfortable the other person felt. Third, notice how your body feels after you hold a boundary. Tension is normal. Guilt may show up. Don't treat those sensations as signals that you did something wrong. Treat them as signs that an old pattern is breaking. Let them pass without fixing anything. As you continue building this skill, the next layer is learning how to say no cleanly before resentment ever forms, how to decline requests without over-explaining, delaying, or softening until the message blurs. A natural follow-up lesson would be something like boundaries, how to say no without guilt or justification, because it focuses on preventing ownership creep before it ever starts. That's where boundaries become proactive instead of corrective. You don't need to become rigid. You don't need to keep score. What you're building is alignment between what you offer and what you're actually willing to carry. When those match, resentment fades. Your yes become lighter. And your relationships become clearer. If you want continued emotional control and boundary clarity that holds up under real pressure, not motivation, not noise, subscribe and keep building this skill.